Ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to this exclusive Jan Ki Baat conversation. I am very delighted to have with me a very special guest who has been with me in the show earlier. But the reason that he's there in the show again is because he has written a very intriguing piece, something which has shaken the power corridors. And this piece is extremely relevant with what is happening between India and China. I am extremely delighted to have with me MP MJ Akbar, who is also an author, an intellectual, and extremely well-known name, and a former journalist. It's a pleasure to have you on the show, sir.
Thank you, Pradeep. Thank you for all the kind things you say.
Yes. So, Mr. Akbar, I want to start this interview, and I want to start this by the title of the article which you have written, which has annoyed a lot of people, and at the same time, it has made a lot of people unhappy. But my objective is not that. My objective is to know whether there is any merit and truth in what is being proposed by you. Your article says, "Is India still paying for Nehru's China submissive policy?" Now, my counter to you is, Mr. Akbar, even after 60 plus years, are we still to blame Nehru for what is happening, particularly with India and China?
Well, there are tactical mistakes, there are temporary mistakes, and then there are historical blunders. And the ones that I have outlined actually show, first, that whatever Jawaharlal Nehru, who was India's first prime minister, as we all know and very respected, that his China submissive policy began in a particular idea or approach to the world, which actually became, in a very, very fundamental sense, was an international policy at the cost of national interests. Now, let me first actually explain to you that when India became free in 1947, Tibet was an independent country and was widely recognized as an independent nation. However, equally true, the Chinese never ever accepted Tibet's independence. From the time of Sun Yat-sen, which is 1911, right up to his heir, which is Chiang Kai-shek, they made it very clear that the reunification of China included the reunification of Tibet. Chiang Kai-shek was a very close friend of Jawaharlal Nehru. You must remember that Nehru's China policy was not initiated after he became prime minister. It was part of his thinking all through the 1930s, and he had his reasons. Yeah, we are not into this silly game of symbol vilification. We are trying to understand a historical problem through historical facts. And through the 1930s, he actually got entranced by an idea that was proposed actually by Sun Yat-sen in a very famous speech at Kobe University in 1924, that the China and India, if they came together as friends, could be the backbone of a future transformed post-colonial Asia. Now, there is nothing wrong with that idea, and indeed, it is a possibility, certainly. They are the two major powers of Asia, but the Chinese also made it very clear right from the beginning that this would not happen without India recognizing Tibet as a part of China. Now, in 1946 September, Jawaharlal Nehru became head of the interim government, which is a transition government towards freedom in August 1947. One of the first things he did, it is a little surprising that in September 1946, when India was already burning with communal passions instigated by Jinnah, and primarily by Jinnah and the Muslim League, who had begun, quote unquote, their jihad for partition. The very first thing that Jawaharlal thought was a conference of international pan-Asian unity rather than Indian unity. But be that as it may, this Asian Relations Conference eventually took place in March 1947. And in that, the organizing committee invited Tibet, because Tibet was an independent country.
Yeah.
Now,
Uh,
Chiang Kai-shek immediately objected. And that was the first test. And in that test, Jawaharlal Nehru buckled, because the Tibetan delegation was instructed not to raise the issue of Tibet's independent status. And even on the flag, there was a compromise and so on and so
okay.
forth. And from the very beginning, you can see. Now, you talk of why we are still paying. Let me tell you something that will startle people, at least those who don't know this. And this is based on letters written by Vijay Lakshmi Pandit in 1950. She was then the envoy in America to the UN, and the Jawaharlal Nehru, of course, was prime minister. And she writes to her brother saying that the Americans are pushing for building public opinion, and they want India to become a member of the United Nations Security Council. Now, 7 decades later, that is still at the top of our diplomatic agenda. And Jawaharlal Nehru, in his letter to his sister, says, no, we will not accept it because this will upset China. In 1950, he had already taken Kashmir to the UN Security Council, and he refused to play.
Mr. Akbar, sorry to interject you, because this is a very critical point on which I need to intervene. So are you to say that when in 1962, then Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru said that he had complained that he was backstabbed by China, was that incorrect? Was he actually backstabbed by China? Or if what you are saying is true, then this was the logical conclusion of how China was behaving since then.
Absolutely. And even in my book on Nehru, I had headlined the chapter because, after 1962, Jawaharlal Nehru said that, oh, the Chinese have stabbed me in the back. And my headline said, it was not a stab in the back, it was a stab from the front. But the vision of the first prime minister had become befogged by some utopian idealism, which completely blinded him to our country's national interest.
But why?
The recognition of Tibet from the very beginning changed the dimension, because our border was no longer with Tibet, our border became a border with China. Then the 17-point program, 17-point agreement between Beijing and Lhasa after the Chinese annexation, we accepted it. We didn't raise any objections to it. We didn't even come to any kind of a deal. In 1951, Zhou Enlai actually opened a window for a negotiation on the border settlement. And Jawaharlal Nehru, at that moment, despite the advice of senior and wise bureaucrats like Girija Shankar Vajpayee, who said, use this moment and finish this problem. Otherwise, the Chinese will come up to you later on when they are in a better position to force their wishes.
No, but
as for the war in 62, Mao Zedong made it very clear later on. He says, that war was necessary because India had to be taught a lesson.
So then was Nehru fooled?
Well, he kept believing till the very end that China would never resort to war.
Why?
And that is why the defense preparedness, he said this over and over again. He said it in Parliament.
But why? If these were, like, if Mr. Akbar, I want to just take it further, because this is a very, very important point. In September 1951, Mr. Nehru decided, when this was discussed, and I want to read the statement in September 1951, when Zhou Enlai provided an opportunity for the closure, that there is no territorial dispute between India and China, but Mr. Nehru decided that it would be better to let the sleepy boundary die. That is what.
Yes, that's the phrase I've used.
And this, Mr. Akbar, if some facts were on place, what you have pointed out, that China was slowly and gradually giving the signals of not being bestest of friend as Mr. Nehru was thinking, then why did Jawaharlal Nehru think? What was the rationale to it? I want to understand the rationale to it, because as you know, you have been an ex-foreign, Minister of State for Foreign Affairs. You understand foreign policy better than anybody in this country. I don't understand the rationale for the India-China
Well,
policy at that time.
First, let me correct you. I don't understand foreign policy better than anyone in this country. I'm sure there are a lot of people who understand it far better than me. And that would be at very least a great exaggeration. However, I do feel I have some knowledge of a few things because I do my research before I put my pen on paper. And the reason why Jawaharlal actually refused that option despite the advice of everyone around him, despite the letter that Sardar Patel writes to him, right? Why does he, for example, on the UN Security Council matter, not disclose that to the cabinet? Obviously, that is a matter that should be disclosed to the cabinet, okay, and then discussed. But it is kept in secret. It requires decades later such a letter emerges. In 1955, Premier Bulganin of the Soviet Union makes a similar suggestion. And Jawaharlal Nehru privately tells Bulganin that yes, the Americans earlier had also offered and I rejected it, as if it was an achievement. Now, as I was saying then, and I repeat, we had already taken Kashmir to the United Nations. He had taken
biggest blunder.
With a veto in the Security Council, we would have had immensely more ability to explain and put forward our case to the international and also to prevent blackmail. Instead, that veto and that seat was eventually given to Communist China with the support of Jawaharlal Nehru, and Communist China became the biggest strategic friend of Pakistan. So you can see the long-term, impact and why it continues to have an impact. Now you were saying about why he actually explained to Panikkar, who was he had a discussion with Panikkar, who was his envoy to Beijing, that no, if we raise the border issues, it might lead to tensions. And the need for an Indo-China alliance actually overrides any other strategic or tactical move.
So
it was slightly bizarre.
Mr. Akbar, yes, the word is bizarre, absolutely. Let me tell you that you're being too humble and accepting your knowledge on foreign policy, but it is fine for you to be humble, Mr. Akbar. I understand that it is your nature, but let me, press you further. Mr. Akbar, if you look in retrospect, and you've studied this in extremely detail, I want to come back, you said it is completely bizarre, but after 1962, that is when Nehru presumably says it to the public that he was backstabbed by China, which was not the case, which you have clarified. Did Nehru realize his mistake after that, that what he did with respect to UNSC was a blunder, or he was still in this transcendental, his whole transcendental vision, or is his idealism of looking at the foreign policy relation?
And I'm reminded of that old Hindi film song, "Sab kuch luta ke hosh mein aaye to kya mila." But after 62, Jawaharlal, he was an idol of India, and Jawaharlal was a broken man. And therefore, his whole prime ministership itself was now, I think, was very visibly stumbling towards a kind of political, and in fact, his own life went away after a stroke in 1964. So it was the legacy that is still, which is still actually in play. And my point, which I think a second point, which since you raised 62, is this. No, the 1962 war was begun by Mao Zedong I think 20th November 1962. Yes. It was also ended by China unilaterally. It was begun unilaterally by China. It was ended unilaterally by China. And China actually withdrew its
Mm.
forces all along the line of actual control
Mm.
towards a line that China drew. Today,
Yes.
the line of actual control is actually a line that Mao Zedong's and Zhou Enlai's China
Yes.
drew,
Yes.
right? Now,
Correct.
my point is a very simple common sense question. How can China have any claims to
Mm.
any piece of territory that it vacated voluntarily? We
Mm.
were in no position to impose our will. If
Correct.
any party is a party with any grievance after 62, that party can only be India, that nation can only be India,
Correct.
right? We might or might not, or whatever it is, make a claim or not make a claim. But
Correct.
China drew this line. So China cannot make any claim beyond this line.
Mm.
Because if they believed that there was any territory left beyond this line, they could have occupied it. We were in
True.
no military position in 1962 to push
Mm.
them back. Therefore,
So,
I think some of the rhetoric that I keep hearing uh,
mm.
uh, it sometimes persuades me to feel that there is a kind of nibble and eat policy which is constantly in motion, depending on how strong Beijing feels itself to be at any given moment. One thing that you and I can say very clearly that Beijing may or may not be as strong as it was in 1962, but certainly India is not going to permit a repeat of what happened in 1962. There is no question of
Yeah,
that. And anybody who knows the Prime Minister Narendra Modi should have at least some modicum of intelligence to understand that.
and I'm absolutely convinced on that front because I'm a patriot by heart, and Mr. Akbar, you are also a patriot by heart. But there's some people in this country who believe that India has ceded its territory, and they want to spread this falsehood. Now, I want to, before going on to the current situation on the border, I want you to compare. If you look, a lot of historians and a lot of public intellects compare the current Prime Minister Narendra Modi's foreign policy with that of Jawaharlal Nehru. How do you look at that? What is the similarity between the two, and what is the main startling difference between the two, you feel?
Well, you know, what is very curious and interesting is that the people who claim that Jawaharlal the best prime minister are now saying that in China matters this prime minister is the same as Jawaharlal. The
Mm.
I, you know, this is an absurdity. Uh,
Mm.
Prime Minister Modi has defended the national interest with a clarity and a strategic understanding of the situation, which is extraordinary. And we have seen it vis-a-vis some other neighbors. We have seen his deft diplomatic ability with which he has managed the border problem with, for example, Bangladesh. We have seen the clarity and strength which we have shown on the border with one neighbor which believes that terrorism is still the answer to the situation. And, after uh, Rajiv Gandhi's peace deal with China, which was in 1988, I think that was 1988. And I remember being in Beijing at that time, and I remember shaking Deng Xiaoping's hand. He was a short man, but I've never seen anyone with such powerful hand, and what a grip he had.
Mm.
And even our then Prime Minister was quite amazed at the grip of Deng's hand. But after that signing of that agreement with Deng, it has been the endeavor of every Prime Minister since then
Mm.
to ensure that the Indo-Chinese border is one on which differences do not escalate into conflicts.
Mr.
Uh,
Akbar, can I come in here if you do not mind, or you want to complete?
Well, I just wanted to make a point that that sometimes some prime ministers in between have shown kind of what shall I say, an ability to slide rather easily. But I don't want to say more than just this. that Prime Minister Narendra Modi does not have the word slide back in his dictionary.
Well, that's a
He is
very
absolutely firm and clear. And when the line that he draws is written in rock,
Mr. Akbar,
is
if
drawn
you
on
get
rock.
Mr. Akbar, I understand your intention and conviction and your vision, and I agree with you that the Prime Minister is very visionary. But if I look at the facts right now, Mr. Akbar, your critics say that look at what has happened in Nepal. Of your friend from eternity has turned a foe. Look at what how China is trying to influence Pakistan after the removal Article 370, which I feel is the most historic decision taken by this government, and generations will remember it for it. Look how China is behaving. People say that the line of actual control has not been demarcated like the LOC has, and this is why there is a region where both India and China have their own interpretations. But China is right now getting extremely aggressive with respect to India. Now look at the economy, Mr. Akbar. Economically, China's GDP is at least six times that is that of India's. Look at the amount of $8 billion was the investment by the FDI by China in India as of 2018, if I'm not wrong. The urbanization of China is roughly double that of India. So this is the economic reality between India and China. And now I've given you the way China is trying to encircle us. Please tell me, Mr. Akbar, how will we counter China, A, diplomatically, B, also economically in the context of Atmanirbhar Bharat?
Pradeep, I mean, sometimes I wish there was something new in the world. The China's policy of a ring fence, has been part of its strategy for a very long time. Let me just remind you that the Prime Minister who ordered that all economic, there should be a kind of sanctions and a ban on goods and so on to Nepal was Rajiv Gandhi. And we are talking of 1980s, right? So the ability of China to put its pro sort of China elements in play in Nepal has been part of a continuing diplomatic engagement. And there is nothing, I mean, this is it. This is a continuing challenge of any power within the neighborhood. In fact, if you think that India has problems with its neighbors, the country with the most problems with its neighbors is China. It has problems even with sea neighbors, including Philippines, right?
Okay.
So there is hardly a neighbor with China apart from Pakistan, which is really a tributary state rather than a neighbor with which China does not have some form of a dispute. These are things that are part, as I said, of the diplomatic challenge that we have to face and which we have managed also extremely well. And in fact, at this moment, certainly there is a prime minister in Nepal who is, a communist, but more than that, seems to display a sign of predilection for being, partisan, a party man and therefore partisan in his foreign policy as well. But I'm sure that we should be able to handle that with the kind of diplomatic finesse that is required to deal with this situation. Sometimes the critics get too enthusiastic and start saying things which do not exist, as for example with Bhutan. Bhutan has denied one of the allegations that was made and again traced. I mean, so I really don't see what actually some people cannot do not feel their day is complete until they can find some things, some chimera with which they can criticize the prime minister. But that's part of the democratic process, and democracy permits everyone with a view of their own, and so may it always remain. Now, as far as the economic, you've raised a whole cupboard full of issues. But
Yes, please.
as far as the difference in economic strength is concerned, China started moving ahead in the late 1980s and 1990s.
Yeah.
And it is a long process. China also is a kind of state where it can impose things which a democracy cannot do. That it can, for example, impose a kind of labor situation which is not possible in democracy. It opened its manufacturing capabilities and production capabilities, permitted goods to be manufactured by multinationals at a price and in conditions which only can happen in a sort of authoritarian state. Can't happen in anywhere else. But that is really, again, something that is part of the historical process. There will come a decades when we will be able to come into our own. The last 20, 30 years, China has been able to, after really the man who built this new China is Deng Xiaoping.
Yes.
And there will come decades when, and I'm sure this decade itself will show a narrowing of the gap as our capabilities rise and our manufacturing and capabilities rise, our markets flourish, and so on and so forth.
Mr. Akbar,
the fact
Mr.
that
Akbar,
you
I need
mentioned.
I have to ask two more questions because I'm running short of time. You are running short of time, and you're a very busy man, Mr. Akbar. Are you being too casual with China? Because way I see your response, you are being like, "We will handle it. You don't need to worry about it." And are you being too casual, or are you being overconfident with the way you are handling with China? Because I'll tell you why. Major General G.D. Bakshi, the man who has been one of your foremost supporters on Indian television, I want to say, he's tweeted 3 hours back, and I quote, "China has come right back to all those areas it had vacated. Let us stop squabbling among ourselves. Right now, the government is more busy fighting Congress. Need to focus far more on China. It is increasing force level against us. Who says it is all over?" Mr. Akbar, how do you want to respond?
Well, let me just reassure the very good general, and I'm sure his heart is in the right place and his mind is also in the right place. Let me reassure the general that as far as defense is concerned, India's defense policy is the strongest that we have seen in a long while under Prime Minister Modi. I have no doubt in my mind about that. It is not always possible to discuss every single detail, and he, as a general and who has been in the army, would know that everything it is not possible to discuss. But I don't think that the opposite of confidence is panic. Right? I'm not being casual. I'm merely being confident because I have faith in our defense forces. They have shown, even in this confrontation, what their capabilities are. They have shown it in the past, right? And these days of the one-way street are long over. And it is thanks to generals, including the contribution that people like General Bakshi and his colleagues have made over decades, that we have reached this position. But today's defense policy, we are not what we were even in 2014, when we did not have enough ammunition left to fight any confrontation. I really don't want to get into more on this subject on that. Let me just leave it, because we are discussing China and we should take a national position on China and not partisan positions. Right.
My penultimate question to you, Mr. Akbar, what are the options available in front of India right now? How do you see this? Do you see this escalating with China? How do you see this stopping? People say that China is trying to revisit the status quo and change the status quo. Now, you have highlighted how Jawaharlal Nehru's, the then Prime Minister's, submissive policy is at the root of it, but now we are trying to correct the policy. I want to know, where are we heading on this? Will we see the standoff continuing? Like the Prime Minister in yesterday's Man Ki Baat said कि हमको किसी ने आंख उठा के दी तो हमने भी उसको करारा जवाब दिया, to understand the essence of the message. Yeah. So where does it go from here?
Well, our response is already read. I would just urge you, Pradeep, to tell all the friends that you have who have such views to start doing nothing more substantive than reading the front pages of newspapers.
Sure.
And start reading, for example, what is happening on the economic front.
Sure.
In our relations. Just checking. I don't want to repeat it. Just start checking. what is happening on contracts, what is happening on many other fronts, because the message is very clear that if you want conflict, fine, we will protect ourselves on the border, but the response will be multi-layered. The response will be on many tiers, right? And you cannot have a one kind of situation in the border and expect normalcy everywhere else.
Absolutely.
And this is as clear as that. And I think the message is going through. The message has gone through. You can see from the manner in which important world powers have come to our side. You can see the manner in which there is replenishment of our defense capabilities. You can see the messages that are being sent out from the world capitals.
Yes.
And it's very clear that the world knows that in this present crisis, if there is fault to be handed out, then we know where the fault lies.
That's very nicely put, Mr. Akbar. In fact, I should tell the viewers that how Israel, Russia, US, all these countries, we made emergency defense purchases, and all of them are on their way. And whether it is the Quad countries, I have not come across even one single country which has supported China in this standoff, and US, any country. And this is a very positive sign. And looking at what China is doing with this to Australia, which has been its year-long trading partner, clearly there is a big trust deficit with respect to China. I agree with you on that front. My last question to you, Mr. Akbar, and this question, I do not want you to dodge this question, it's a personal request. There are murmurs in Delhi, Mr. Akbar, that there might be a cabinet reshuffle which will take place sooner rather than later. Can we expect Mr. Akbar to come back into the cabinet with his foresighted and in-depth insights, and which can guide the policy making?
That is, I'm sorry to say, totally unnecessary question, because I have very little to do with such decisions. There is only one man who makes such decisions, and he's the person who knows the answers to these questions. Our job, where we are, and I'm really not doing a meek and humble bit, I can assure you that. Our job is to, wherever we are, I serve in Parliament, I serve in the party, I serve in the effort to build up a rational, historical, and even scientific response and understanding of the crisis and the challenges that we are facing. And if I can contribute in any little way to that, I'm quite happy to do so. Such questions really are very, they don't.
Mr. Akbar, you're becoming spiritual. You become too spiritual. Let me tell you. My last question to you: how much will you rate Prime Minister Narendra Modi on his, dealing with China out of 10, and what will be the ranking which you will give Jawaharlal Nehru?
No, that's these are those questions that let me just say one thing. We began with Jawaharlal Nehru. Look, let me just tell you one thing about the Prime Minister. I've had the privilege to work with him, and we have all had the privilege of watching him, what he does, right? If you want to see a leader who knows how to manage the immediate response, the middle game, and the long game, then you have to watch very carefully how Prime Minister Narendra Modi has handled situations like this, whether with other neighbors who have been hostile, whether with Doklam, right? And you will understand that he is a person we can all trust.
Fine. On that note, I would like to end this conversation, Mr. Akbar. You did not answer the rating which you will like to give the first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru. I understand you've become too spiritual in your responses, but I give you that option to choose. It's a pleasure to speak to you as always. And thank you so much, and take care of yourself during the time of COVID, and hope to see you soon. Thank you so much, Mr. Akbar. Pleasure to speak to you.
Thank you very much, Pradeep. You look for somebody who actually moves out. You should be taking far more care than we'd be, right? So take care, and thank you very much for this exchange. And
Thank
I hope you get, you know,
Sure.
what you sought. I
Thank you,
hope you
Mr.
got what you sought. Thank you.
Pleasure.